So where are you at physically?
Right now, I'm at home since it's day off up here in Canada. It's Easter holiday Friday, I guess. Good Friday, right? Right.
Oh, it's a holiday. Is
Yeah.
it like a holiday for everybody?
Yeah, it's a
Oh.
national holiday here.
Oh, that's awesome. I think it is I think it is here too. Sorry everybody. Everyone at the
That's
no,
okay. It's actually like probably the best time to like to get me these days, right? Because it's otherwise
right?
it's lots and lots and lots of meetings. But no, I'm based up in Toronto and along with the head office here. So.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk about what you're doing because it is super geeky, right? But it's
Hmm.
also it makes sense from a business standpoint, and when those things collide, you typically have something. And so when I saw what Kira Systems was doing, I was just like, "Yep, this is the person I want to talk to." Oops, did we disconnect
It's
already?
definitely it's no,
Oh,
I'm still here. I hear you still.
okay, great.
Um, anyways, I was just saying it's a very very interesting area and gets a lot of hype these days, which is always a bit worrying in some ways. But nonetheless, people are excited about it, and it's really making a change in the way lawyers are doing work and other people, non-lawyers as well. So.
How did it come about? How did the opportunity come up?
So I actually was doing a postdoc at the time, and my co-founder, who is a lawyer, he used to work at a big corporate firm in the U.S. Was introduced to me through a mutual friend, and I said, "This is a brilliant idea. I think you could do it." With my postdoc to do it, he persisted though. He said, "Why don't you start part time?" And I did that, and here we are. Eventually, I dropped the postdoc because it became too much work. But yeah, we finally succeeded. The early days were, of course, always difficult, right? Especially selling enterprise software as a small, four-person company. Nobody wants to actually deal with you just because of your size,
Right.
which is kind of a difficult chicken and egg thing. But once you get your first customer, things help.
Yeah, so how'd you so that's how you did it. You got your first customer that would take you and then you what magnified their success with the product?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting story, actually. Our first customer, ironically, was not a law firm; it's an audit firm,
Ooh.
and they read a lot of documents as well for auditing purposes and for consulting purposes. And they had actually talked to us a year beforehand and decided to go with a rules-based system from another company. But that didn't work out for them because rules, if you don't know what a rules-based system is, it means you have to have an expert writing like regular expressions or things like this to match whatever patterns you're looking for. And that doesn't scale because you have to have an army of people writing these regular expressions. And eventually, once you get a huge set of rules, it becomes really unwieldy and hard to manage. So it wasn't a great success. So they came back to see us again. And by that time, we actually had created a feature. Well, it wasn't even created. We had a internal demo of a feature that has become quite important to us. And this is one where any one of our so our clients can actually train their own machine learning models, but it's done in such a way that they don't really know they don't have to know any technical stuff at all. It's just, do their normal work, highlight things in documents, hit a button, and it will learn from that. And that was a feature that actually sold them because they have an army of people, right? They have thousands of employees. And by allowing those non technical users to be able to train these things by themselves without any programmers or developers being in the loop, that allowed them to scale really quickly with it. And the fact that the technology actually worked also was kind of important to them, right? So yeah, that's how we got our first big customer.
Oh, that's really exciting. And then so you get your first customer, right? And then just a little bit about this. So what I'm gathering is you have this sort of like contract search, document search, AI machine learning thing where the common people can like assistively train them for what to look for. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, we also provide out-of-the-box models that we train. Because our system is easy to train, we have our own team of lawyers internally that are creating models. So, it's a bit of out-of-the-box stuff, but also if you need to do something that we haven't taught the system how to do, you can do that yourself. And that's so the value is in both the automation and the customization, I suppose.
Oh man, I really like your site too. The way it's really clean and simple. You have the little animated GIFs kind of showing how the process, their search, analyze how it all works, because it allows the person to instantly see and understand what it is and what it does. That's sharp. I like it.
Thanks. Yeah, design actually is also something that we've tried to focus on ever since we started the company, actually. And so one of the things about machine learning is really, the technology and having it work is important, but how you integrate it into people's lives is equally important, right? And so this is why design is so key, just like for any product, really. But people often forget that when it comes to machine learning. They're like, oh, it's fancy new tech, and once you get this thing working, the rest doesn't matter. And that's actually not true at all. The rest really does matter.
Yeah, we had Andy Budd on the show the other day. He wrote one of the most popular design CSS books in the world was CSS Mastery. Yeah, and he runs 3 or 4 different massive design conferences, and I love looking at his company's website because it's just so beautiful and simple, right? And so I had him give some design tips and things like that. But it's really cool to get to talk to people who really like design and who understand the importance, because so often that's not the case, and you're always cringing at like poor design and experience. But when you get a good tool that brings legitimate, necessary value to a market that is designed well, it makes me feel good inside.
Yeah, I think design too is particularly challenging in the enterprise space for various reasons. I mean, enterprise targeted services have a bad rap for being poorly designed, and a lot of them historically have been. But I think that is changing, right? I mean, even things like Slack now are technically enterprise services, and it's beautifully designed, of course. So
yeah. So how did your co-founder Noah? You guys have been together for 7 years, right? Working on this project. Mm-hmm. How has the relationship sort of grown? I mean, you guys have over 50 people now, and you started out with just, you said, I think 4, small team of 4. How has the relationship grown? How has it changed from when it was just 4 of you to now 50 of you?
So we're actually closer to 80 now.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
But yeah, growing quickly.
We'll say 100, because that's where you're going to be by the end of the call. I love what you're doing.
Pretty much. If we could get to 100 that quickly, that would be good. We are hiring like crazy, actually. So very likely we will be at 100 quite soon. Anyways, back to Noah. Yeah, so Noah and I have always been very good about kind of segregating duties in a way. Like the tech side and the design side has always been kind of my area, and then the other side of things, dealing with client sales, all of this stuff has been more his side. And then on the business strategy, we just collaborate. We do try to be very data driven and work things out just by either by data or by reasoned arguments and things like this. So it's worked out well. I mean, we don't always agree like any pair of founders, but most of the time we all can come to a good agreement on direction and what we want to do. And yeah, that's how it's gone. Now that the company's bigger, actually, we don't have any time to talk at work. So we always have to have meetings after work just so that we can connect and, talk business strategy and direction and things like this.
Yeah, you got to get that clear space and just step back and take a look at it. And that's the sort of the best position to be in when you're making those, like, what are we doing? Where's it going? Those types of conversations. I find that they don't usually happen in the office ever.
Yeah. I mean,
when the company scales, yeah.
Yeah, when you're in the early days, when you're 4 people, then you're talking all the time. Like, I
Right.
mean, and of course our jobs have changed immensely too. I mean, when we first started, I had Noah writing XML documents, marking up things so the system could learn from them. And now he definitely doesn't do anything like that. Fortunately, nobody has to write XML documents to teach the system, but nonetheless, yeah.
Yeah, now you have companies like the largest law firm on earth, right? That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah, we
So
do.
what's the next stage? Like, what are you most excited about that's happening, that's coming down the pipeline?
So for me, being on the technology side, I'm of course most excited about some of the upcoming tech we're working on.
Hmm.
But also, from the business side, it's really interesting to see how this stuff is starting to be adopted. When we first started selling it, actually, it was a very, very hard sell. Law firms are interesting places to sell to because they're very conservative, and they bill by the hour. So if you're selling them a tool that makes them more efficient, that's not always beneficial to them. Um, though there's other things that do matter as well, like accuracy, right? Or just being able to do more for the same amount of money. But nonetheless, people were very skeptical at first and just unsure of like, why should we adopt it? But eventually, now that it's so such a popular thing, there was some turning point where everyone went from being skeptical to everyone went to being skeptical, but okay, I need this because you know clients are asking, are you using these fancy tools? So that was a really interesting shift to see. And I think in the next couple of years, actually, there's some interesting social implications of artificial intelligence that we're all gonna have to deal with. And certainly the law firms are gonna be hit with that as well. They're already very sensitive about stuff, unlike other companies, right?
Like data
Because their
privacy.
data,
Yeah.
yeah, so a law firm can't give out their data. Even if they wanted to, they just can't. And worse, their clients, once they're done with a project, they have to delete the data. So even leaking a single word from a contract is too much for them because it could be the name of a client, and that poses a big problem for machine learning because machine learning is all about data. And even things like if I use some client documents to teach the system something, does it retain information that I'm legally required to delete? And so having model or machine learning technology that's able to abstract and throw away all the details, basically encrypt it or hash it type thing so that it's unrecoverable, uh, is crucial more and more and more, especially as we have interesting laws come about like GDPR and things like this. So there's a lot going on in that in the kind of legal side of things.
So, are you writing about this? Are you like writing and speaking about this? Because this is the conversation that's going to be happening on a very large scale soon, if it's already not happening. Like how you're dealing with these problems and how you're like on a level, you being a leader in the machine learning thought space on how you deal with this because you're a company that's growing with cash flow that is going to continue to grow in a space that's, like you said, it's very constrained by what you can and can't do. So these problems that you're solving, you are not the only ones with these problems, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I have not been known on these things publicly probably enough. We certainly talk with our clients about them all the time because many of them ask about this sort of thing. Uh, but yeah, it really kind of turns the conventional idea of what a machine learning company is upside down because you've probably heard many, many times that the value of a machine learning company is the data that it has.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, that's not true. We don't have data, right? Like we have some. There's public documents. The SEC gives out a bunch of documents, and that's valuable. But we don't have client data. We don't collect client data. We can't collect client data. So the value in ours is the opposite. The value is that clients can learn from their data and then keep all of their models private to them,
Ooh,
and it
nice.
becomes their value, right? So it's going to this extreme, a combination of providing models that are trained on public data, and then on the other side, it's this extreme customization, this bespoke machine learning thing, and that's kind of the unique thing about this area.
So I'm getting a lot of people writing into me saying that they're currently focused on the GDPR. Some had some questions about it, but you're like in a space where it really matters and you've spent some time on it, correct?
Yeah, I mean, so the GDPR affects us like anyone else. Certainly, there's aspects of it that are straightforward. Don't collect as much personal information as you can. Make sure you have audit records and that you can delete things if needed. That sort of thing. The implications for the machine learning side are not as well tested. So there is this notion of model explainability that deals with, if you have a machine judgment that's made about a person, that person can then demand that they get an explanation about why that judgment was made. Fortunately, we don't get affected by that because our software doesn't actually make final judgments. It still has a human in loop, right? And the human still does the review and looks at what the machine produces and says, yes, this is good, or no, this isn't. So right now, today, we don't have that problem. But certainly you can imagine futures where we will. And the whole, issue of, does a model need to be explainable? And if so, to what level of detail? That's something that, we might have to deal with, and others certainly will have to deal with. And then when you throw in like privacy preserving models that are designed so that you can't explain what's in them, then it gets really interesting, right?
So who does it affect, this new GDPR?
Basically anyone who deals with anybody in Europe. And since we're, tech is a global economy, right? And most web services have people around the world. So it essentially affects almost everyone who provides, any sort of software as a service, or even selling old fashioned, sending software to be on-prem. If you're doing that in Europe, it's going to affect you as well.
So do you see this coming to the other countries, like to Canada or the United States?
Probably. It's unclear what form it'll take, but you've certainly seen the backlash about Facebook right now, and so that kind of thing can easily lead to legislation that deals with stronger privacy controls for people.
Do you know anything about how they plan on enforcing this? Or because this is, just so you know, I haven't spent a lot of time on the GDPR, right? So when people started writing me about it, I was poking around on it, and I was like, all right, this is kind of cool. And I've had 6 people write into me in the past 3 days that they're working on to meet a deadline, and I'm like, oh, okay, very interesting. So I saw what it was. Okay, it's about privacy as data. Okay, it seems to be in the EU, right? But then I'm wondering how would they how do they enforce this? Do you know anything about that?
No, I think it's too early to tell.
Yeah.
How that's going to happen. I mean, presumably through the various EU governments, if they find a violation, then somehow they will,
That's what it is. That's what's going to happen when the data breach occurs. They're going to find the companies who didn't comply, right? That's the easier way than trying to seek out all the companies that, right?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely on. It's gonna. I think it's gonna be in that form where someone will say, "Hey, I asked this company to delete my data, and they did not," right? And then bam, you're gonna get a lawsuit. Or someone will say, my insurance. I think you've used a machine learning algorithm to judge me for my insurance rates, and I demand an explanation for why I got put into whatever insurance category I got put into. That's certainly how it'll come about.
Yeah, because I was just looking up on their site right now, and they said, well, there's a 2-year grace period, then it will be enforced as decided by a future thing. So That was interesting, right? They're just going to figure it out later.
Yeah, I remember a conference in London, and I spoke to a professor studying the GDPR, and there's a lot of open questions, and there's a lot of potential loopholes and things. So I think it's a law that has like a good intention, but probably the details are going to need a lot of tweaking and adjusting. And it seems that they're going to just do this as they go, right?
Yeah. So I have a couple CTO questions for you, right?
Sure.
When you did your startup, right? How did you? Well, it's not startup. When you built your business, right? When you started building your empire, did you? How did you do the capital? Did you already have the capital? Did you seek it? Did you use your first clients to grow? I'm really interested to know about that.
So yeah, that's a great question. So we're all self-funded. We've never raised money. We've never taken money. Initially, Noah and I put some of our own funds towards hiring our first developer. And once we got the first big client, the deal was big enough that we could hire a whole bunch more. And after that, we just grew on client revenue.
Oh, I love it. That's my favorite because that means
Yeah.
that the market loves what you're doing.
Yep.
It means you're bringing
Exactly.
value, right? So
For
so
sure.
what sort of sticks out in your mind over the past 7 years is like one of the more difficult decisions that you've had to make as a CTO?
Hmm. I mean, the most difficult decisions to me are always people related, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you let a person go because they're not performing, or things like this? Um, so I think those are some of the most challenging for sure. Certainly also negotiating bigger deals with bigger clients. One of the things that is very common in enterprise software is customization. So every big company wants to throw their weight around and have you build some custom feature just for them. And that's a challenge because that can be really, really damaging to us as a software company, right? Because every custom feature has a huge maintenance cost. You can't resell it. Um, it's not great. So I've been quite aggressive at pushing back against that, and certainly we had to do custom features in the early days, but as we've grown, we've been very aggressive at just saying no, 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 we're not doing custom development. We'll build tools so that other people can do their custom development on top of our platform, but we don't do custom development. So that was always challenging in the sense that some of those negotiations could be quite intense.
Oh yeah.
People get really passionate about this sort of thing.
Well, I've seen businesses crumble because of it, because they start customizing for the client, then they end up working for the client, and now their product no longer serves the market. It's just useful to the one client. They get stuck in that trap.
Yeah, and certainly there was a period in our history where we were very, we were on that path slightly, not by choice, just because when you're small, you want to sign those big deals, and so we agreed to some of this stuff, and it was a challenge. We're still paying back technical debt for some of our early decisions there, but nonetheless, on the other side, here we are, right? So
Right.
you could say, I guess, that even though some of those uh, agreements were a bit painful from the custom dev point of view, they still got us the income that we needed to grow to this point where now we can tell people, no, you know what, we don't need, we're not going to sign this. There's other people that we can sell if you are insisting on this custom development business. And on the flip side, as I said, we are trying to support those needs because most of that, it's important to remember, most of those requests do come from a place of need. It's not like these companies are out to get you or something. They have their internal needs, and so we're trying to support that through other means.
So yeah, like you could get a partner network going that can build upon your base layer APIs and then just refer everything out to them, right?
Yeah, that's an option. Certainly one that we're considering.
Yeah.
We have some partners that are doing things with our APIs and whatnot as already. So we have some really neat integrations that have been built on top of our APIs. But so yeah, I mean, a lot of companies also have a internal consulting division that just is separated, that does its own thing. I mean, I guess IBM as the classic example of this, right?
Right.
We haven't gone that route. Or consulting work scales not as well. I mean, as selling software, right? To scale consulting work, you need to hire more consultants. So it's kind of like a 1-to-1 ratio always. So we haven't done a lot of consulting because of that. But the other thing is that if you have a consulting business, it can influence your product development, because, hey, those big consulting jobs are really lucrative. So maybe you shouldn't build a complete product and try and encourage people to use your consulting arm. So we don't have a consulting arm. We believe that we should build the software so that you need as little consulting as possible. And I think that philosophical position leads to a better product. But of course, I guess time will tell.
Well, I'm going to lean on that side too. I I hyper focus back on the product and the direct value it brings the customer and how we can bring that to the entire market, because the ideal is domination, like owning the market, having every person who could possibly need your product use your product, right? Yeah. So the other thing, other than the data privacy, that's been a lot on the minds of people that have been writing in, is training, which I was actually surprised about. People are talking about training and training developers and continuing education a lot lately. So that's something that's new for me that I haven't come across. I'm curious, what do you do with how big is your development team of the now 100 people? How many of those is development?
So we have, I guess, 22, 23 at this point. I don't know the exact numbers, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
somewhere along in that. And then if you count the lawyers who actually build models by teaching the system, then that's much higher. But I don't.
Right.
They're in product, not development, in the sense of they don't write code. So training is an interesting thing, especially for us, because one of the choices that I made early on is to use a language called Clojure, which is a Lisp, and it's small, and so that has brought some interesting challenges. So in the early days, actually, it was quite good, because the kinds of people who are interested in writing Clojure tend to be experienced and good developers who are they like learning new things, and they're I guess a little bit of a risk taker type mentality too. So it acts as a great kind of hiring filter. Now, however, at this size, as we're looking to grow bigger, and it's like, okay, can I add 10 people to my team, in a couple months? Then that's a hard question, because the answer is, well, there's not that many Clojure developers around, and certainly in Toronto local, if I wanted to hire people locally, there's just not. There's Clojure developers and they all have jobs.
Right.
So that's forced us to have a lot of remote workers, for example, and it's forced us to consider training, because you have to be willing to bring on new people who don't know Clojure and have them learn on the job, or buy some training materials for them or whatnot. So admittedly, we could be a lot better on the training side. Nonetheless, we do hire, say, co-op students routinely, and each and every one of them has to learn Clojure when they start. Mostly that happens just on the job with mentoring. We have bought a few kind of video classes that I don't believe many people have made use of. So that hasn't worked out too well. We also had a few, we attempted to have internal, like, teach people Clojure sessions, which had mixed results. So we've tried various things, but unfortunately right now it's really just a lot of, one-on-one mentoring from, lead developer to the junior developer. The other thing as a company that we've done is we have an education budget that people can use to buy whatever materials or resources they need, or take a course or whatnot. So we do try to support on-the-job training in that sense as well.
Oh, so they can just spend it freely on whatever they'd like to educate themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be reasonably related to their job, right? Like they
Right.
can't spend it on learning knitting class or something like this.
Hold on a second now. It gets very cold in Canada.
It's true. No one's made this argument yet, but that's a good point. But yeah, you know, it's essentially, if it's reasonably related, they can just say, hey, I want to spend it on this, and we let them.
Oh, that's excellent. No, I like the culture there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been thinking, because this has been coming up, you know, over the past week or so. I was talking to Mitch how do you say his last name, Jake? Van Dyne. He is a pretty cool dude. He invented the algorithm for the mouse acceleration back in the 80s. So when you start moving your mouse around the screen, the fact that it speeds up with the quicker hand movements and goes farther, that's him. Did it for Xerox, which is like really neat. And then Apple and Microsoft picked it up off the Xerox project. So that's his little, like, you know, claim to fame, which I thought was pretty cool. Just came up randomly in the interview. So if you're holding back anything like that.
No, well, so I guess my claim to fame would be completely unrelated to anything legal. It's when I was young, I used to work at the Hospital for Sick Children doing human genome research. And I was, you know, I started actually in high school, and I worked there throughout university. So I'm actually on one of the papers that the first time that the full draft of human chromosome 7 was published, and this is in the journal Science. So I'm on that, and I'm in the part that is, so usually with these big lab driven things, there's like a section that's all alphabetical that just has like all the people who supported the work, but I'm actually in the part that's before that, where it's, you know, the more significant authors. So that's kind of my claim to fame, I guess.
What? Dude, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, at the time I didn't realize the impact of that work as much as, you know, looking back, I'm like, wow, that was like a really good opportunity.
Yeah, that's awesome. You have to get like the page where your name shows up and like frame it and put it up in your house.
Yeah, I have a copy of that. We all got copies of the like a color printed copy of it from Science, the journal itself. They gave that out, so I do have that.
That is awesome, man. My brother and my stepmom are both doctors, so I grew up around it. They're always talking about. I come from a big geek family. Half are engineers, the other half are doctors.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
No, yeah, I love it. Yeah. So what I was thinking about was, you know, because I write on the topics of code, and so I get to kind of see what the global community is about. And so there seems to be like a big conversation about spaghetti code. Like, I work with some of the best developers on earth, because I don't know if you know about me. I've been writing code for 17 years, right? So my dad did it, and then he taught me. And so I'm like always learning and always growing and expanding on writing code and becoming better. And, you know, I read all the books by all the authors, right? The Clean Code, the Martin Fowler book, like everything. I'm just always consuming information. And then when I'm interacting with the community as like a global community of software engineers, it seems that the 80% is still stuck in that first gear of having issues with writing spaghetti code and all the things that come along with that, and then knowing like how to get better because there's too much junk on the internet, right? There's too many different videos and too many people speaking, and so that has been coming up a lot. But then I thought to myself, all right, well, that's a section of the market, right? But then it brought up the question to me is like, how do the best people get better, right? Like, and then where's the content for them? Because right now I just consume everything that comes out, right? And then just practice and then look at other people's code. But I can't find any resources that are like made by great people to get better on the principles of programming. There's lots of content around, like if you want to learn the different features of Ruby or Python, you know, courses like that. But I couldn't find any courses or anything on like just becoming better in general, like at the different habits of being a great developer. So if you come across anything like that, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm like you. I sort of just read what I can and practice enough, and that's how I learn new tech. And you know, going back to teaching as well. So I guess it's a little bit challenging for me sometimes to understand the pains that people go through with new languages, because I've been doing it so long that, you know, now a new language for me is quite straightforward. I'm just like, okay, you know, so I learned Go recently, and Go is really easy to learn. It's a very clean language. Um, so, you know, when people are like, oh, can we get training? My reaction is, why do people need training? That, you know, intuitively, but then I'm like, okay, you know, I guess, you know, I have to remember back to when I was young and inexperienced. It's like, okay, yes, probably you need training. But going towards your, back towards your, you know, how do you architect good code? Like, what are good practices? I don't know. People argue about this all the time.
Right.
And they argue at the academic level, and they argue in industry. And, you know, I don't know that there is actually one right answer. I think it's kind of, it's going to be something that people argue about for decades and decades to come. Nonetheless, there are certainly some patterns, I guess, that we're seeing are good or bad in hindsight. One of the ones that I took home from Clojure is the idea of immutability, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a function, given its inputs, always produces the same outputs, right? There's no hidden data structures that it's modifying somewhere that you'll have an unintended side effect, you know, in another part of the application. And that was a really powerful, simplifying concept. And now, as I, you know, write Go code, um, that comes to mind. I'm like, well, maybe I should be somehow naming my functions so that ones that actually do mutate the arguments you're giving them or have some other side effect are marked explicitly. Um, so, you know, but there's that kind of idea is still, it's, some languages do it. I think Swift maybe has something like this,
Mm-hmm.
but most, so there's kind of like small patterns like that I think, you know, probably will find their place. But
Yeah.
no,
What
I don't have a good answer for you on the larger side. I can talk about writing research code though, which is a different thing.
Well, so what I was thinking about was I always try to pull like analogies from other places to see how they would match in different worlds. So without being too ambiguous, like I was looking at fitness because I like to go to the gym, and what I was thinking was, well, everyone agrees that you should be active, right? That you should be healthy and that you should work out and that you should get a certain amount of exercise. But the arguments are in the details of how you specifically do the exercise. How do you twist your hand? How do you perform the motion? That's where all the experts get nerdy. So I was trying to parallel that back to programming, where like, what's the principles, like the equivalent of being active, that exist in programming, code structuring, you know, architecting, that transcend the language, right? Because that's one of the reasons why you and I can see through languages, is because once you learn enough of them, it's like it's tough for me to explain it to someone at sometimes, because I say everything's just the same, like it's just code, like right? Because when you have a complete understanding, it all just kind of melds together. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter what the language is. Give me the manual. Show me how this individual structured his language, right? Because then you can speak it. So it's just a matter of figuring that out. But when I look back at what the analogy is with fitness and to code, I think to myself, where's the pieces of programming that everybody agrees on that we should be doing, and then where's the 30-minute workout video, right? Where's the 1980s spandex, you know, jumping up and down? Like, where is the practice, and the, you know, the doing what great people do? Like athletes, they train and they all run, but they run differently, and they change the way they run to keep it excited. Today they're running sprints of 30 seconds, but tomorrow they're running distance as much as they can, right? And they change it, but the principle is they run, and they always find a different way to run every day. So I'm thinking to myself, where is that for me? Like, where is that for programming? Where is that for lead developers, junior developers, like, and everybody in between? And so that's the question that I've been asking myself this week.
Have you read this book on intentional practice? I forget who wrote it, but there's a quite famous book on intentional practice. I haven't read it, although my partner, she read it, and she's quite into it and has told me a lot about it. So basically the idea there is that, you know, just practicing is fine, but not maybe the best, right? Like you can practice the same thing over and over again and not improve. What you really want to do is narrow into things you're bad at and it's uncomfortable and do that, right? And so you basically, that's where the intentional part comes in. Like when you're practicing, always focus in on things that are hard for you. So I guess in the case of, you know, development work, it's maybe focus in on something that you're unfamiliar with, right? Like a new concept, a new, maybe learning languages that are very esoteric or something can expose you to new ideas that can then have a ripple effect with everything else. I don't know, just guessing. I mean,
I think I've read that book.
But,
I want to know which one it is. I want to know which one it is. I think it's called Deliberate Practice. That might be it.
Practice.
Yeah, that is a great book. Like one of the big themes in there is find the place where you have the most questions or you feel uncomfortable, right? And then ask those questions, right? Like, why don't I understand the life cycle of how data flows from a form on someone's screen through a post request down through a controller, down into a model, down back out into a view and give a result? Like, why don't I understand that life cycle, right? Like, where is the breakdown there? And because it's the same no matter what language or framework you're using, period. You could be using Rails, some sort of whatever the Python adaptation is for web. I just am blanking right now, but Django, I think it is, right? Whatever it is, you still have the same concept. You have a bit of data that takes this path, and when you understand that, now the question is not what's happening. It's what tools of this toolbox do I use to make the data flow in that life cycle, right?
Right.
That's much more simple. Right?
Yeah.
But the code schools don't teach it like that, my friend. I found out, I started doing some mentoring with some code school students, and they do not teach it like that. They teach it like, oh, here's 7 different Hello World projects we're going to do. One's an Airbnb clone. Yay. I'm like, that doesn't help. You know,
or they'll teach jQuery or something, and then when you suggest that, hey, you know, you don't need jQuery, people who can be shocked when they've gone through just one of these boot camps, right? Because they're like, what do you mean you can not use jQuery, right? So yeah, I think that's a good point about some of the code schools. And then on the flip side, the universities, they teach the theory, which is excellent, but also half of it, right? It's not, there's a lot of practice that is missing from university educations.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, and you have a computer science degree, so you would be one to, authority on that, right? They're teaching the theory of what if data flowed this way. The other people are teaching the details of the functions. Well, you use jQuery.this to do that, and then that middle area of like what's actually happening is lost in the wind.
Yeah, or even like things like writing tests, and how do you go about doing that, and how do you go about documenting your code, and why is code style even important? Like, who cares, right? But there are reasons it's important, and that kind of operational kind of thing is often missing from university programs.
Yeah, I just, whenever the code quality stuff comes up, I'm like, look, you do it for you, because you're going to be the one in there editing that in 6 months, and it's either going to take you 20 minutes to figure out what's going on or 20 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean, I think we've all been there. We go read our own code, and it's just like, what was I doing?
Yeah.
Why didn't I write better documentation?
That's why when you find the people that are there for 15 plus years, they just got frustrated and was like, I'm going to be here for another decade. I'm just going to start writing it better today.
Exactly.
Right? That's my path. Like, I didn't come out writing code perfect. I wrote pretty poor code for the first 5-6 years, just getting excited because I wanted to make the screen do something. And then when I kept going, I was just like, look, I realized I'm going to be in this forever. So I'm just going to start I started reading books and figuring out how to make it a pleasurable experience versus a painful one. And it wasn't an overnight thing, and there was no course. It was just consuming tons of content and then desiring for my life to be easier and doing small things all the time along the way. And it eventually got better,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, none of this was on the notes. I didn't have any of this on the This is like my little therapy session. Apparently you brought this out in me, my friend.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of developers would resonate with these kinds of ideas, right, and experiences. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out. If people want to find out more about you, how would they go about doing that?
Probably, well, I mean, you could just Google my name if you want to find out about me personally. But
Yeah.
if you want to find out about the company, just jump on our website, and there's a lot of materials there. Eventually, hopefully one day we will start writing blogs and stuff as well, and tech blogs that we haven't gotten there yet. That's one of those like forever projects that we don't never have time to get around to, but hopefully one day we'll have that too. We do have a company blog too that talks a lot about legal stuff, which if you're interested in that, people can read that as well.
You mean lawyers like to write? No, I'm just kidding.
In fact, do, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out. And there's also a cool person. I have one friend that's in the legal space. His name is Derek Johnson, and they have a company called Lawlytics. They actually make content for lawyers, but they've got, several hundred, if not a couple thousand people. I think they're 50 people big now, and they're out in Arizona in the United States, and they're good people in the legal space, and all their customers are mid-size law firms. So that might be of interest to you to talk with them, because they have a bunch of people that I think are your customers. Ever mid-size law firms?
So our customers are actually we're going for the top biggest law firms right now. We don't have too many mid-size ones. That's also still on the to-do list.
Yeah. Well, if you do, they're just great people.
Yeah, so I did listen to that podcast actually, and their story was really good.
Oh yeah, their company's been growing a lot too. So you listened to Derek?
Yeah, I listened to at least half of it yesterday. So.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah, Derek and I have been friends for like a decade. He actually just moved away from our town about like a month ago. He went up to North Carolina to explore the world up there. So that's exciting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much. So we're on about a 10 to 15 day editing delay. So when it's coming out, when the episode's coming out, we will send you an email, but we'll also clip up what we call micro content, which is like 2 minutes of you saying something awesome. And then we'll tag you on, LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that, so that your team and everything can see you being a rock star. Right.
Excellent.
Yep. So we'll just be doing the micro content. So look out for those tags. And then when we push the episode out, we'll send you an email before we do.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, Alex.
Good talking.
All right. See you, buddy.